Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
I'm Egbert, the owner of this station. Check out my website at egbert.com. That's E-G-G-B-U-R-T, egbert.com. Now it's back to Brad and John. Check out their website at bjshow.co. The BJ Show? Come on, guys. Anyway, here's B and J.
All that reinforcement from our boss just makes you just want to, have the world's best show. God, that guy's behind us, isn't he? He's so much positivity behind us, isn't he, John?
Yeah, but you know what? We don't need motivation externally, Brad. We're internally motivated guys. We don't need a boss either propping us up or tearing us down. We get up in the morning and we do what we're gonna do. I don't have a TIMD list like you do. That's your shtick. You have a TIMD list.
I do.
But I know when I go to bed at night what I'm gonna do the next day. I don't need Egbert pedestalizing me or cutting me down, Brad.
I love these words John comes up with. Pedal. Say that again now.
Pedestalizing. So, for example, if you see coverage of a Beyonce concert, ooh, she's so powerful and brave. When you take someone and you elevate them more than a mortal man, and Brad, we're in a religious time of year, right? Like, why should we deify a Beyonce or any celebrity, Brad? Why should we pedestalize someone like that?
Well,
for anything other than their inherent actions and their character traits. You know what I mean? Just because they're famous, why would we pedestalize somebody? They're not the second coming. I don't mean to get religious here, Brad. But you know what? We've already been canceled so many times in our own lives, haven't we, Brad?
Well, don't get me going about the Beyonce thing because there's the current controversy. She comes out with a country song, which is not really country, but it is, I guess. You know what I'm talking about? This song she's got out.
Yeah, I've heard about it and I haven't heard it. I'm not a Beyonce person whatsoever.
Once again, she's sort of throwing down the race card. She's saying, well, the country radio stations won't play it. Well, that's not true because I've heard it on country stations, but you got to understand that the country music stations, for the most part, have a very tight playlist. And for example, let's go back to the Blanco Brown thing when that was like the number one. There's a perfect example. Don't get me going on this because this involves.
I won't get you going. But you know what? As you tend to do, Brad, fortuitously. On a very important week, you lead into stories. And for example, playing the race card is story number 1 today, but it's not a black person playing a race card, Brad. I guess we'll get to that in a few.
Well, John, I have an authority, and by the way, that is John Combest, C-O-M-B-E-S-T. Every single day of his life for the past 22 plus years, he puts together the JohnCombest.com report, which essentially is a great big smattering of all the important things that have gone on in the state the day before. He links to websites, to government websites, radio station, media websites, stuff like that. Sometimes to the actual people involved websites for their own explanation. But I can guarantee you that I have a scoop on John this morning. He's going to give us the top 3. We're going to start in a minute. But I know a story that's happening today that you don't know about. That is
I can't wait to hear it, Brad.
Earth-shattering. Your buddy, Jay Ashcroft, last night, late night, he issued a press release that he felt that there weren't enough people applying for his job running for the Secretary of State's office.
Yeah, that's true.
So he's extended the deadline through tomorrow afternoon because there aren't enough Republicans, especially.
He was about to. And you know what? Now, Brad, before we get in the top 3, I have to say this. Maybe we'll come back to this after we talk to state representative later. But Valentina Gomez announced last night she has a brand new campaign advisor, and you're never going to guess who it is. And we'll just leave that teaser out there. I couldn't believe it. This is not a gag, Brad. This is not like a joke I'm pulling on you. She actually announced a, quote, senior advisor, and maybe we'll get to that later.
Is that not one of the top 3?
It is not one of the well, because it's not news, right? Like she's a meme candidate and it's a gimmick.
John.
And it's cute and it's funny and it'll get her attention.
John.
But
John.
wow, like the media may or may not cover it today.
Think about what you just said, okay? Mm-hmm. What you just said is you were essentially saying she doesn't have a chance in hell, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was a time when this guy who had orange skin got in an elevator and came down onto the main floor of an office building in New York and said, I am running for president of the United States. Everybody went, oh my God, he doesn't have a chance.
I know.
There's
and
no
Brad,
way.
You are right about that. And as I've acknowledged before, the problem with my analogy is, much like Donald Trump, for example, Valentina Gomez and other candidates who don't have a chance to win, they are multi-millionaires with high name ID. They have a bold proclamation for the state, and they've already have built in tens of thousands of loyal followers throughout the state when they come down that escalator. So you're right, Brad. It's a perfect analogy.
John, remember what happened in England some years ago when they let it up to...
we told the Limeys we didn't want to be a part of their stupid country anymore, and we seceded.
When we let it up to the public in England, there was this new oceanographic boat which was going to find out all these new species in the seas and document sea life and the whole bit. And the English government was so proud of this boat, and they came out with this contest. Hey, we want you to name the boat. Whatever you come up with, that's going to be the name of the boat. And what was the number one?
It was Bodie McBoatface.
Bodie McBoatface.
It's true. Hey, I've said it before. Well, we're belaboring this, I think. Let's get into the top three.
And the English government says, no, we're not naming it Bodie McBoatface, even though we said that you were going to name it. Okay.
Yeah.
Casey, are you there?
We're on our way to the number one.
And we start off with...
In third place.
Brad, what's the only thing better than a mom?
Larry David?
No, that's a good... I am a big Larry David guy. I would say, Brad, of the things that we pedestalize and deify, the only thing better than a mom to me is a mom that demands action. You know what I'm saying, Brad?
Is this a new group like Moms Action for something or something like that? Is that where you heading
Well,
with this?
it's Moms Demand Action, and they're funded by a group called Everytown. Yeah. They're a gun control group.
Right.
And every year, at least once a year, they get together at the Missouri Capitol, and they're generally, Brad, and I know that you like the stereotype, Brad, but they're generally women in comfortable shoes, and they come to the Capitol, and they shuffle around, and they go meet with Democrats, and they talk about how terrible Republicans are for not supporting gun control. And yesterday was their big day of action at the Capitol. And this story is brought to us by KRCG in Jefferson City. Did a nice piece. As usual, Brad, the television station just reads the talking points and the data points that are provided by Moms Demand. But yeah, first of all, not only do Moms Demand Action have the best name in politics because, but also the highlight of this piece from Jeff City yesterday is they featured a woman that regular readers of my website will recognize, a woman named Leslie Washington. And she's a seasoned citizen from the southeast part of the state. She's a black woman. And she received one of the fellowships. So Moms Demand Action in Everytown, they have a fellowship where you get a stipend to go annoy legislators and make yourself look good or whatever. But my favorite part about Miss Washington is she submits letters to the editor, and as one of the conditions of the scholarship program, you have to meet certain quotas, Brad. So think about that, the irony of somebody who's a diversity pick having to meet a quota, that speaks for itself. But she has to write a certain amount of letters to the editor every year, and she takes talking points verbatim from the Everytown website and sends them to the Southeast Missourian. And the Southeast Missourian prints the form letter. Every newspaper says they don't print form letters, but she does. But the joy of it is, though, Brad, regular readers of my website will recognize the name Leslie Washington, and you actually get to see her speak and talk. She's a real person. She talks about her experience, why she's there with all the other geriatrics shuffling around and annoying staffers and legislators, and you get to see her in the flesh. So that's really the highlight of number 3, Brad.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a dumb question. What action are they demanding?
So, Brad, think of a generic gun control agenda. So, mandatory background checks. Their big thing is, their big talking point is always assault weapons. We got to get rid of these assault weapons. There's too many assault weapons on the streets. And they modify they have a national agenda, which they tailor by state. So every state that does a Moms Demand Day of Action at the Capitol will highlight whatever legislation is going on in that state.
John, the thing that I can never understand, or I hear this all the time about, we want mandatory background checks. I'm going okay, hey, any of you listeners to the show, go out and try to buy a gun today without a background check. You know,
Yeah, and
unless-
see how long it takes.
Right, unless you're going to, Joe on the street corner who's got, he opens up his trench coat and he's got 14 Glocks sewn inside of it. Hey, which one do you like?
Yeah.
I don't understand this whole crazy thing about mandatory background checks. You'd think that this was still like 100 years ago where you can open up the Sears catalog and order a gun and it shows up in the mail. You know what I mean? That doesn't happen anymore. Okay, moving on to number 2.
Up a notch to number 2.
There's still time, Brad. If you want to make your trek to Jefferson City and file for some statewide offices, maybe file for some legislative offices, there is still time. This is a unique quirk in Missouri law. Are you familiar with this, Brad?
I'm not. I thought it was over with. No?
Yeah, au contraire. Under Missouri law, and this story, by the way, is brought to us by Rudy Keller of the Missouri Independent, a veteran content creator. Under Missouri law, this is verbatim in his piece, when candidates withdraw within 2 days of the close of filing, a special filing period opens for 4 days the following week. So, for example, Dean Plocher pulled out of the lieutenant governor race, and Senator Mary Elizabeth Coleman pulled out of the 3rd congressional district race. They pivoted to different races. Both of them happen to be running for Secretary of State now. So when there's offices in which a candidate pulls out, then there's a special filing period that opens the next week. So next week, there's a total of Rudy lists them in here. Other races, a number of these are state rep districts, Brad, where a candidate pulls out at the last minute. So next week, between Tuesday and Friday, folks can come to Jeff City and file for lieutenant governor. They can file for the 3rd congressional district. They can file for the 2nd congressional district because a guy named John Keeney, who we've talked about here, he pulled out. He's supporting Ray Hartman now in that race. And now someone else could go file, if they so chose. And so technically, Brad, we thought the filing frenzy was over, but it's still going on. And there will probably be a few additional people that file for these seats.
But more importantly, does that mean that somebody can file for Secretary of State? Because we don't have enough Republicans
That's
in
true,
it.
yeah. Hey, Brad, we joke about it. But there's not a single candidate in the race that's from the Kansas City area. So why hasn't somebody from Kansas City filed for Secretary of State?
Because those people over there are smart? Is that what it is?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I think what they're doing is they're spending all their time helping KCUR organize, Brad. I mean, that's where you spend your weekends.
Don't get me going, John.
The number 1.
And here's the number 1.
It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. That could describe Hazelwood East graduate. I started to say former Hazelwood East graduate, but once a Spartan, always a Spartan, Brad. That could describe Wesley Bell. The Post-Dispatch has 2 pieces about Wesley Bell up today. Have you seen these, Brad?
I have not.
Okay. So in the category of best of times, Wesley Bell has gotten even more endorsements from unions. So most folks listen to this know that Wesley Bell has filed to run against incumbent Democrat Congresswoman Cori Bush, a member of the Squad. Also, another candidate in that race is former State Senator Maria Chappelle Nadal from University City. So Wesley's been going around picking off a few union endorsements here and there. Cori Bush isn't always down with all aspects of the Biden agenda. Wesley Bell was just endorsed by the Carpenters, which is a BFD in this region. And also, Brad, plumbers and pipe fitters. And as Spanish Lake kids, we have an appropriate deference, I think, for pipe fitters. So these are important endorsements for Wesley Bell, and they show that, there's at least there's more folks willing to stand up against Cori Bush. And it's risky to go up against an incumbent if you're one of these union groups. So that's the best of times thing, Brad. The worst of times things is a piece that's up today in that it involves a discrimination suit that has been filed against St. Louis County. Now, we'll speak in general terms here, Brad. We generally don't have to bow to political correctness on the show, thanks to Egbert's freedom that he gives us here. But a white female attorney who is described in court documents, her name is out there. It's Susan Peterson is her name. And she alleges that she was fired from Wesley Bell's office because of her age. She's an older lady, I guess you could say. Her race, she's white, and her gender, she's female. So in the lawsuit, and here's where the sticky stuff comes, and here's where it's could be a challenge for Wesley Bell. She's seeking to prove that in Wesley Bell's office, he has a pattern of discrimination against women, and that he has he doesn't treat women as fairly as he treats men. And then more specifically, of course, he is more likely to fire white men and white women than a black man or a black woman. But the real crux of this, Brad, is that this woman's attorneys deposed Wesley Bell, and they wanted to ask him a very specific question, which was, do you have or have you had sexual and intimate relationships with your subordinates in the St. Louis County Prosecutor's Office? And Wesley Bell's attorneys came back and said, this is beyond the scope of anything that has to do with this case. These questions are not relevant. And legal folks who I know are listening to this show can correct me if I get the nomenclature wrong here. But Wesley Bell's attorney said, look, these have nothing to do with this case. We're not going to answer these questions. And a judge ruled that indeed Wesley Bell does have to answer those questions. So the intimation here, Brad, and this has been, helpfully spread by former Senator Maria Chappelle-Nadal, of the idea that, at least the suggestion here, that Wesley Bell was having a sexual relationship with subordinates in his office. So best of times, worst of times, Brad. I mean, it seems like on the campaign side and politically, things go pretty well for Wesley Bell. But this, of course, the longer that this case goes out and the more chit chatter and the less that Wesley Bell can have to say about this, probably the worse for his campaign.
John, I can't understand why the unions aren't fully behind Cori Bush. I mean, you remember Cori Bush was the one that wanted to shut down Boeing in North County. Oh, excuse me. Remember that word?
Yeah, exactly.
How many
anytime you're opposing any sort of federal spending, whether you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, the unions aren't going to be fond of that. But hey, you know what? Josh Hawley goes around hanging out with the Teamsters now, Brad. It's Josh Hawley Hoffa over there.
Well, and the Teamsters have become sort of friendly with Trump as well, too, which is sort of interesting.
That's true. Or at least not antagonistic against him.
Right.
Yeah.
And the whole crazy thing. Do you believe this Wesley Bell stuff? Do you think there's where there's smoke, there's fire on this deal?
Oh, I don't have any idea, Brad. And listen, here's the thing. One of my favorite political mantras is, friends come and go, but enemies accumulate. And if you are Wesley's been involved in Democratic politics for 15, 20 years. There is so much factionalism in St. Louis City and St. Louis County Democrat politics between the police and the defund the police and, the union folks and the not so union folks, that Wesley has accumulated enemies over the years, just as he's accumulated allies. And friends come and go, but enemies accumulate. And I think that enough people that dislike Wesley Bell are certainly going to do whatever they can to pile on when it comes to this case. And the fact is, Brad, unless you're involved in this, nobody knows. I will point out what you and I have talked about in other contexts on this show before, is that we've now reached a spot where everyone is guilty until proven innocent.
That's John Combest. You can check out his entire website with you think he's got 3 good things. He's got dozens more just today. Check it out, johncombest.com, COMBEST. We're going to take a break. We will be hold on, I'm going to hit the red button here. We'll be right back.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's COMBEST, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?